Welcome to the Deep Dive. We take stacks of sources, research, all our notes, and we try to pull out the most important insights for you. Today, we're looking at a story that, well, it really captivated the world. A tragic road trip, all shared online, that just unraveled so quickly into this really deep mystery. You know those curated images of van life you see everywhere?
Yeah.
Plastered all over social media.
The perfect shots.
Exactly. But here, they masked something much darker. Far more disturbing, actually.
Yeah.
It forced us all to confront some pretty difficult truths about relationships, about what we miss.
It's a case that I think resonated so widely because it just pulled back the curtain on so many things simmering beneath the surface. It wasn't just one tragedy, right? It became this lens, a way to look at relationship dynamics, the power of social media, how law enforcement responds, even things like media bias.
That's it, exactly. So our mission today, our deep dive, is really to get past those sensational headlines about the Gabby Petito case. We're going to try and meticulously unpack the chain of events, really look closely at the unsettling relationship dynamics at the heart of it all, and then analyze those bigger societal conversations it sparked and pull out insights that honestly apply way beyond just this one heartbreaking story. We want you to understand not just what happened, but really why it hit such a nerve, why it resonated so deeply, and what lessons, maybe uncomfortable ones, we can learn about relationships, media, personal accountability. Just be prepared, because we're going to touch on some truly shocking details and, importantly, discuss some crucial missed opportunities that, looking back, well, they might have changed everything.
This should give you a really comprehensive picture, not just the facts, but sort of the currents running underneath them.
Okay, so let's start unpacking this. It begins with what looked like, the absolute picture of a modern dream. We're talking about Gabby Petito. She was 22, from Long Island, New York, and her fiancé, Brian Laundrie, 23. And they had this big plan, a 4-month cross-country van life journey, in Gabby's converted van, a 2012 Ford Transit Connect. And they were documenting it all meticulously on YouTube, on Instagram. Their whole online thing just painted this picture of, like, sun-drenched idealism, a modern fairy tale, really, set against these amazing landscapes.
Yeah, and what's striking almost immediately is that contrast, right, between the public image and the private reality. Gabby, for instance, her background, she'd even been in a music video about gun violence awareness, seemed socially conscious. She met Brian in high school, so there's this long history there. Years before the trip even started, they'd moved down to Florida near his family. They worked regular jobs, Publix, Taco Bell. Gabby was a nutritionist too, got engaged July 2020. It really looked like this solid, adventurous young couple, ready to take on the world.
So yeah, on the surface, it's the perfect aspirational van life dream, that whole idea of freedom, exploration, sharing your perfect life online. And that's the appeal, isn't it? It's this curated highlight reel.
Totally.
But what becomes just tragically clear here is how starkly that public face contrasted with the reality unfolding behind the scenes off camera. You see the beautiful photos, the smiles, but beneath all that, significant, really concerning tension was already building. This wasn't just, normal road trip stress. There were deeper, darker things going on.
Absolutely. And the first really big public crack in that perfect image appeared on August 12th. 2021 in Moab, Utah. This was huge because it wasn't private. It was seen, documented. A 911 caller reported seeing a man, Brian, slapping the girl, Gabby, outside a store. And the caller specifically said he proceeded to hit her again before they drove off. I mean, that's a direct third-party account of physical aggression. You can't just brush that off.
No, you can't. And the police response, the body cam footage, it's just chilling. If you've seen it, it's hard to forget. Gabby is just so visibly distressed, crying, hyperventilating, can barely speak.
Wiping tears constantly.
Yeah, gasping for air sometimes. And then Brian, he's remarkably calm, almost eerily calm, telling his side. That contrast is so stark, so unsettling. It just screams power imbalance, doesn't it?
From a behavioral standpoint, this is where it gets really, really telling about the relationship dynamics. When the officers separated them, Gabby, even through all that distress, she admitted hitting Brian first. Said she was trying to distract him from driving, that he wouldn't let me in the car. She even sobbed, "He really stresses me out." But here's the crucial part. Despite everything, she kept asking the officers not to separate them, not to charge him. Brian, though. He says Gabby was getting worked up. He was just trying to push her away to calm her down. Mentioned she got me with her phone. See that? That subtle shift of blame onto her.
Right. And despite the witness saying Brian hit Gabby, Despite her obvious distress, the officers classified it as disorderly conduct, not domestic assault. One officer even said it seemed more like a mental health crisis. No arrests, just advised them to separate for the night. That decision, that classification, experts point to that now as a massive missed opportunity, a huge red flag that was basically ignored.
It really makes you wonder about training, doesn't it? How law enforcement identifies domestic violence, especially coercive control, which is often way more subtle than just physical marks. Laura Richards, the criminal profiler, her analysis of that body cam footage was profound. She looked at Gabby's behavior, taking responsibility immediately, walking on eggshells, begging not to be separated. And then Brian's calmness, the way he instantly blamed Gabby. She said those were classic red flags for coercive control, clear as day. She called it murder in slow motion. A huge missed opportunity for intervention. It wasn't just a fight. It was a symptom of something much deeper, much more dangerous.
Wow, murder in slow motion. That's powerful.
And we also heard later a park ranger, Melissa Hulls, spoke to Gabby and apparently warned her, said her relationship seemed toxic. She sensed it too. So multiple people saw something was deeply wrong.
So that Moab incident, caught on camera for everyone to see, it was that first undeniable crack in the facade. It showed these underlying issues that were about to escalate so tragically. And it wasn't just a one-off, was it? This was part of a pattern, a destructive one already in motion.
Absolutely not isolated. The picture we got later, especially from Gabby's friend Rose Davis, who was 21, it painted this chillingly consistent picture of a dynamic that had been bad for a while. Rose called Brian jealous, manipulative, and controlling. And she gave specific examples, not just general feelings. Like, he'd apparently take Gabby's ID so she couldn't go out to bars with friends. He didn't like her having friends because, Rose said, he was constantly worried about Gabby leaving him. That kind of control, that isolation. It's textbook abusive behavior, slowly cutting someone off from their support system.
Yeah, classic isolation tactics. A way to exert more control, cut off outside perspectives. And it sounds like the arguments weren't just happening, they were getting more frequent, more intense. But even more disturbing were these strange episodes Rose described. Brian hearing voices, unable to sleep.
Yeah, and apparently they got so bad that Gabby sometimes had to leave, had to go crash at Rose's place just to get away from his erratic behavior.
That's incredibly unnerving, especially when Rose also said Brian could seem polite and caring, but also a little weird. That duality,
Yeah.
It's often mentioned in these situations.
And Rose's account also cleared up some confusion about the engagement. Remember, Gabby's mom thought they were engaged, but Brian called Gabby his fiancée.
Right, that was odd.
Well, Rose revealed they had told Gabby's mom the wedding was off, but secretly they still planned to get married. It just shows another layer of deception, of control, Brian potentially managing the narrative, not just with Gabby, but with her own family. It highlights the manipulation she was under.
So putting it all together, this relationship wasn't just arguments. It was emotional abuse, isolation, Brian's apparent mental health struggles escalating. It all tragically foreshadowed what was coming. It wasn't just a troubled relationship. It was becoming actively dangerous. And this destructive pattern was about to hit its peak in those final awful days on the road.
Yeah, the timeline right before Gabby disappeared is just critical. It reveals this sequence of events that gets increasingly suspicious, almost frantic. August 17th, just 5 days after Moab, Brian flies from Salt Lake City to Tampa, Florida, alone, leaves Gabby behind. His lawyer later said it was to get stuff, close the storage unit, save money. But he comes back, rejoins Gabby on August 23rd. That solo flight, looking back, it's deeply unsettling. What was he doing? What was he planning? It breaks that continuous trip narrative.
Definitely a weird detour mid-trip. Seems almost calculated, like handling business back home before the end. Then we get to the last confirmed sightings of Gabby, August 27th. A couple from Louisiana, Nina Angelo and her boyfriend, they were in Jackson, Wyoming, saw Gabby and Brian at a Tex-Mex place, Mary Piglets. Nina said Gabby was in tears, visibly upset, while Brian was visibly angry, yelling at staff.
And Gabby apparently went back later to apologize for his behavior.
Heartbreaking. Just highlighting her trying to manage him, smooth things over, shows the state she was in.
Same day, August 27th, surveillance video from a Whole Foods in Jackson shows them going in around 2:15 p.m., leaving at 2:30 p.m. Then their van drives off at 2:56 p.m. onto Highway 89. That's the road heading straight into the Bridger-Teton National Forest, vast, remote wilderness. And that's the last known footage of Gabby alive, a chilling final timestamp.
But the texts from Gabby's phone after this, that's where it gets really suspicious. Points strongly towards deception by Brian. August 27th, her mom gets this odd text from Gabby's phone. "Can you help Stan? I just keep getting his voicemails and missed calls."
Stan being her grandfather.
Right. And her mom immediately thought it was weird, alarming even. Gabby never called him Stan. It raised immediate red flags that maybe Brian sent it, trying to make it seem like Gabby was okay, still communicating.
Then another one, August 30th. Final text from Gabby's phone. No service in Yosemite. Which geographically made no sense given where they were thought to be.
Exactly. Her mom didn't believe Gabby sent that either.
And the investigation later found strong evidence of Brian trying to create an alibi, trying to cover his tracks, messages sent back and forth between their phones like they were still talking, and then, really chillingly, that $700 transfer from Gabby's account to Brian's.
Oh yeah, the memo.
With the memo, "Goodbye, Brian, I'll never ask you for anything again." It's widely believed Brian did all this himself. A cold, calculated move to suggest Gabby was alive, active, had left him, obscuring what he'd done.
Just awful. And now, the eyewitness accounts near Spread Creek. This is the area where Gabby's body was eventually found. These become absolutely vital. August 27th or 28th, a witness sees the van, empty, parked near Spread Creek. This same witness had also seen a guy, described as a generic young white man, believed to be Brian, driving the van really slowly, acting weird nearby on the 26th.
And that witness's TikTok video about seeing the van there, that apparently is what tipped the FBI off to the right location for Gabby's remains later. Shows the power of social media in these searches sometimes.
Incredible.
Other visuals back this up too. Dashcam footage, evening of the 27th, shows a white van like theirs in that same area. Then, August 29th, things get even stranger with Brian. A woman says she and her boyfriend picked him up hitchhiking near Coulter Bay Village. She said he freaked out when he realized they were going to Jackson Hole, not Jackson, Wyoming, a specific place he seemed fixated on. Jumped out of the car.
Weird.
Yeah, and she thought it was odd he offered $200 for a short ride and that he didn't look dirty or anything after supposedly camping for days. This didn't add up.
And there was another hitchhiker sighting that same day, August 29th.
Right. Another woman picked Brian up near the Jackson Lake Dam, dropped him off at the entrance to the Spread Creek dispersed camping area, miles from where the van was spotted. And she also said he seemed antsy to get out as they got close to the campsite. Jittery, anxious maybe.
So you have all these sightings of Brian alone, no Gabby, his behavior getting stranger, more evasive.
Yeah.
It paints a really grim, undeniable picture. The pieces are just falling into place, pointing to something terrible.
And the final piece, the direct link back to Brian's state of mind, comes from his parents. On August 29th, Brian calls his mother. His tone apparently just completely changed by the end of the call. Then his dad calls him back, and Brian reportedly says those words, "Gabby's gone," followed immediately by, "I might need a lawyer." No other details, just that. It's an admission, right? Veiled, vague, but it's right before everything unravels. A deeply ominous sign of what had already happened.
So yeah, the evidence was just piling up, pointing straight at Brian, his suspicious behavior, his attempts to create this false story about Gabby. You could feel the urgency from Gabby's family just ramping up with every single day, every weird detail. And from here, the story shifts. From Gabby being missing to this intense national search for her, and then almost immediately a desperate manhunt for Brian himself.
Exactly. The next chapter starts September 1st, 2021. Brian Laundrie drives Gabby's white van back to his parents' place in Florida, alone. That immediately set off alarm bells everywhere. And then his actions seemed so calculated to just stonewall everyone. He gets a lawyer right away, refuses point blank to talk to the media, refuses to talk to law enforcement about where Gabby is, despite her family begging for answers.
That silence, combined with him showing up alone in her van, it was just deeply, deeply troubling and incredibly painful for Gabby's family. She's officially reported missing 10 days later, September 11th, after just days of sheer agony for her parents. Her dad described it as feeling like drowning with your hands tied behind you.
Yeah.
Just utter helplessness.
And they tried reaching out to Brian's parents, right? Desperate for any scrap of information. But the Laundries refused to answer. Total silence. Which only made Brian look more suspicious. So because he wasn't cooperating, Brian Laundrie gets named a person of interest on September 15th. Police flat out say he's hindering the investigation. Then they execute a search warrant on the Laundrie home. Treat it like a crime scene. Start seizing electronics, looking for clues, communications. The pressure was definitely building.
And then, just as things are heating up, Brian Laundrie vanishes. Around September 14th, he supposedly goes for a hike. In the Carlton Reserve, this huge 25,000-acre park in Sarasota, Florida, really difficult terrain, swamps.
Right. His family says they went looking for him on the 15th, found his car there with the police note on it. But here's the kicker. Police didn't actually realize Brian was missing, like gone, until September 17th, 2 days later.
That's unbelievable, that delay.
A huge misstep. An extensive search for Brian kicks off, first in the reserve, then it expands nationally. It becomes this massive manhunt. But the focus snaps tragically back to Gabby. September 19th, just days after Brian disappeared, authorities find remains in the Spread Creek dispersed camping area in Wyoming, where the van was seen, where Brian was hitchhiking. The remains match Gabby's description. It was just the confirmation of everyone's worst nightmare, the end of that agonizing search for her.
And the autopsy results.
Yeah.
Released October 12th.
Yeah.
They left no doubt. Just horrific. The full report confirmed Gabby Petito lost her life due to blunt force injuries to the head and neck with manual strangulation, ruled a homicide.
The coroner also indicated her body had been out there in the wilderness for about 3 to 4 weeks, which gives a chilling time frame for when this happened.
Awful. Just awful.
So with Gabby's passing confirmed as a homicide, the legal heat on Brian intensified massively. A federal arrest warrant comes out for him on September 23rd. Not for her passing directly, but for using her debit card without authorization after she was gone.
Right, the fraud charge.
Yeah. But it allowed federal authorities to pursue him nationwide. The manhunt ramped up even more. It was all anyone could talk about, this desperate need for answers, for justice for Gabby.
And that search for Brian went on for weeks, didn't it? It was like this national obsession playing out daily. Then, October 20th, 2021, his remains were found. Partial human remains in the Meocahatchee Creek Environmental Park, near where he was last seen, an area that had been underwater.
A really grim end to that whole search. The autopsy confirmed it later, November 23rd. Brian Laundrie passed away from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head, ruled a suicide.
And the police error you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, that came out later. The Northcourt PD admitted they had actually mistaken Brian's mother for him during surveillance the week he vanished.
No way.
Yep. Which obviously led to a delay in realizing he was actually gone, definitely impacted the start of the manhunt, drew a lot of criticism about their procedures.
Understandably. And then the final piece, the thing that brought some kind of, I don't know, grim closure, the notebook.
Right. Found near Brian's remains. Small, water damaged. January 21st, 2022, the FBI makes the announcement. Brian Laundrie, in that notebook, admitted responsibility for Gabby Petito's passing. Wrote he couldn't go on without her. Took responsibility for her death, gave some details about her final moments.
So a confession, after everything.
A posthumous confession, which, as incredibly painful as that must have been for Gabby's family to hear, it did bring a definitive end to the criminal investigation. Brian's suicide, his written confession, it closed the criminal case. No one else charged. It provided this devastating but conclusive answer to who was responsible.
And that tragic end didn't just close the case file. It really kicked off these huge ongoing societal conversations, forced a kind of national reckoning. One of the biggest topics was missing white woman syndrome.
Yeah, that term, coined by journalist Gwen Ifill, describes how news media often gives disproportionate focus to cases involving young, attractive, white, usually upper-middle-class women or girls who go missing. And the Gabby Petito case, with its relentless, intense media coverage, it became this prime example, starkly highlighting a disparity that marginalized communities have pointed out for years and years.
The numbers really drive it home, don't they? You contrast the nonstop coverage of Gabby,
Yeah.
and then you hear about, 710 indigenous people reported missing in or near that same area, Wyoming,
Right.
between 2011 and 2020.
Right.
And those cases got comparatively little media attention, barely a fraction. Same for missing black men and women often.
Yeah.
It really forces you to ask why. Why do some stories grab us and others don't? What biases are involved?
It's complex, for sure. The Petito case had those strong narrative elements. The documented journey, the videos, the pictures, the inherent suspense early on. It was almost tailor-made for media consumption. But you can't ignore the gender and racial dimension either. It plays a significant role, sometimes unconsciously, in what gets deemed newsworthy. It raises really critical questions about whose stories we value, whose lives we collectively mourn or get outraged about, and why some tragedies get amplified while others are tragically ignored.
And what about Gabby's father, Joseph Petito? His perspective on this is really powerful. He initially felt uncomfortable with the term missing white woman syndrome, which is totally understandable given his personal grief.
Of course.
But later, he publicly acknowledged the disparities it points to. And he's used his platform, born from this awful tragedy, to advocate for more attention for missing persons from marginalized groups. Through things like that TV series Faces of the Missing, the Gabby Petito Foundation, it's an incredible way to turn pain into positive action.
Absolutely impactful. And that intense public discussion, the scrutiny on the media's role, fueled by this debate. It actually led some news outlets to do some self-reflection. They started dedicating actual airtime to discussing the disparities, examining their own choices, which is, maybe a small step towards more equitable reporting in the future. It raises questions of justice way beyond just the criminal side.
Speaking of justice beyond the criminal case, there was also that significant civil lawsuit. Gabby Petito's parents sued Brian Laundrie's parents.
Right, for intentional infliction of emotional distress. A major legal battle after the main criminal case was closed due to Brian's passing, seeking accountability from those still here.
The core of the lawsuit was the allegation that Brian's parents knew Gabby was gone, knew Brian needed a lawyer, and were maybe even making plans for him to leave the country. The Petito family argued that this knowledge, combined with the Laundries' silence and alleged actions, caused them immense avoidable suffering during that period of desperate uncertainty. It was a direct challenge to their perceived lack of cooperation.
The legal arguments were fascinating. The Laundrie's lawyer argued essentially that silence isn't illegal. Remaining silent and maintaining privacy is not intentional infliction of emotional distress. Cited the First Amendment, right to remain silent. They also argued Brian wasn't technically a fugitive when he disappeared, so they weren't harboring one. Their defense was basically, we had no legal duty to speak, we were protecting our son.
But the Petito family's lawyer flipped that.
Yeah, they countered effectively. Said they weren't suing just for silence, but for the Laundries' conduct, their alleged actions and inactions. And they pointed out that the Laundries themselves brought up the idea of making arrangements for him to leave the country in their own defense filings, which kind of implied knowledge and planning.
Interesting.
Ultimately, a Florida judge agreed the lawsuit had merit and let it proceed. And in November 2022, the Petito family was awarded $3 million from Brian Laundrie's parents and his estate. It sent a message. Even without criminal charges, civil liability can exist for actions causing extreme emotional harm.
That civil suit really explored the edges of legal responsibility, the impact of silence, the emotional toll these situations take, even outside criminal court. It showed that conduct, or the lack of it, can have serious consequences, legally and emotionally, for those left behind. This whole story. It's just heartbreaking, but it leaves us with so many questions and a real call for more awareness.
Definitely. We've sort of peeled back all these layers today. From that curated van life dream hiding a nightmare to the awful reality, the intense investigation, the painful truth in that confession, and then these huge societal conversations it sparked about domestic violence, media ethics, justice for everyone. It's a story that, even though it's resolved in one sense, keeps teaching us things.
It is a lot to take in. The echoes are still felt. And maybe, as you reflect on all this, here's a final thought to consider. The criminal case had its tragic end, yes. But what's our collective responsibility? How do we get better at recognizing those subtle signs, the insidious signs of coercive control and abuse in relationships, in our own lives, in the lives of people around us? Those signs were there, hidden behind Gabby's social media, hidden in plain sight during that police stop.
And taking it broader, how do we as a society make sure that all missing persons, no matter their background, their race, their social standing, get the urgent attention, the resources, the advocacy they desperately deserve? It really calls for more empathy, doesn't it? More understanding and definitely more equity in how we respond to these tragedies.
We hope you'll think about how these insights might apply, maybe help foster safer communities, more aware conversations. Keep digging into the nuances of domestic abuse, of media representation. Awareness really is the first step toward any kind of change. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.